The title of this week's movie, I Am Legend, is not referring to Will Smith's character in the way most people think it is. Robert Neville doesn't become legendary to us by saving humanity, he becomes legendary to the infected by becoming their monster. We're talking all about it this week in Kaden's Movie Club. I Am Legend is based on a book by Richard Matheson. In the book, the infected people are not referred to as zombies, but as vampires. And that's because the whole story is actually a twist on the idea of Dracula. What if he felt like he was the last surviving member of his people and was now surrounded by an endless horde of monsters? And if you're having trouble buying this idea, let's take a look at the very first scene in the movie. It's a news clip where a scientist is explaining how she's discovered a cure for cancer. They've reverse engineered the measles virus to work for the body rather than against it, and she uses a specific analogy to describe how that works.
If you can imagine your body as a highway and you picture the virus as a very fast car being driven by a very bad man, imagine the damage that car could cause. But then if you replace that man with a cop, the picture changes.
It just seems like it's introducing us to how the virus happened, but it's more than that. She talks about this idea of replacing the bad man in the car. And then what's the next thing we see? A man driving a very fast car. And that man is our main character, Robert Neville. The movie literally tells us in the opening scene we're going to swap the perspective and the picture will change. We follow Neville in a near future where humanity has almost entirely succumbed to a disease that turns them into frightening creatures. We learn that Neville is still trying to find a cure. He's testing on those creepy rats, but once a compound works, he needs to test it on a real specimen. So Neville captures an infected woman and takes her back to his lab. He tests his newest compound, but it fails and the woman dies in horrific fashion. Neville doesn't react to this at all. He has no sympathy for the creature whatsoever, but he does revive her to keep her alive for future experiments. But let's think of this situation the other way around. From the creature's perspective, there's this terrifying figure that comes to where you sleep, lures you out from safety, and snatches you in a trap. He then takes you back to his fortress, never to be seen again. It sounds like the stuff of legend. It sounds a lot like Dracula and his castle. But there was one key thing that happened when Neville took the infected woman. One of the other creatures, we'll call him Alpha, exposes himself to sunlight. He's clearly distraught that Neville has captured the infected woman. His boo, his shorty, his ride or die. So the story is laying some groundwork for us there. The creatures are more than monsters. Another thing the movie has brought up and will continue to bring up is the idea of God, which is almost always connected in the story by the symbol of a butterfly. Back in the first scene when he's driving through the city, there's a sign that says God still loves us with a butterfly above it. The butterfly shape is a tear in the poster, so it could be coincidence, it could be something more. But the phrase seems to fly in the face of what we're seeing. How could God love people if he let this happen to them? And I know we talked about these same sort of themes last week with Children of Men, and it actually was not intentional to have two stories back to back with such involved spiritual themes. But I will say, same as last week, that regardless of your personal beliefs, I think the story addresses the ideas of faith and hope in broad enough terms that it could still be resonant, or at least interesting to many people. So let's combine both of our ideas here. We've got a story about perspective that's considering how Neville views these creatures, and we've got a story that's saying something about the nature of faith. And then we get this shot in Neville's house. There's a Time magazine with him on the cover, and it's calling him a savior, but there's a big question mark. Throughout the movie, we hear Neville saying, "I'm going to fix this. I'm not going to let this happen." He believes that's his role, to save everyone. Things really ramp up when Neville spots a mannequin standing in the middle of the street. We saw earlier that Neville has set up a bunch of mannequins at the video store. He treats them like real people to combat some of that isolation he's facing. Also, fun fact, they did hire actors that looked like mannequins to make the scene even creepier. It looks like it might be a real person, just like it does in Neville's mind. What's really interesting though is that Neville is so convinced in his beliefs about the infected that in his panic, he thinks it's more likely that Fred might somehow be a real person than the possibility that the creature he's hunting might actually be intelligent. And as it turns out, they're far more intelligent than he could possibly know. This is all a trap. This implies that the infected have been watching him, studying, they know that he cares about the mannequins, they know he drives this route, and they figured out how his snare works, then recreated it. And when Alpha shows up again, his intelligence mirrors that of Neville. He's even got his own dogs, just like Neville has Sam. As you might expect, losing Sam means that Neville has hit rock bottom because now he is truly alone. With Sam gone, Neville essentially gives up. The next scene gives us the best evidence yet that Neville is not just afraid of the infected, he hates them. On the pier, he tries to take out as many as he can in a desperate last-ditch effort. Neville is saved by Anna, who does believe that God is still directing her and has a plan, despite everything that has happened. Neville, of course, and probably a good chunk of the audience, think that Anna sounds crazy. Neville looks at the situation before him and claims there is no God. This is very important. The ending of this movie that you would have seen in theaters back in 2007 is not the original intended ending. The infected overrun his house. Neville, Anna, and Ethan go into the lab in the basement and take cover in this glass vault, but they're cornered and the infected are breaking through. It cracks into a butterfly symbol. Neville seems to interpret this as a sign that God does exist, there's a higher plan, and his role in it is to make this sacrifice. So Anna and Ethan hide behind a latch in the wall, and Neville grabs a grenade he has in a drawer, as people do. Once Alpha breaks through the glass, he runs forward and takes all the infected out in a blaze of glory. Anna and Ethan then take the cure and make it to a colony in Vermont, implying that Neville's sacrifice saved humanity. This ending ending completely abandons a lot of the ambiguity about Neville's relationship to the infected and instead serves up a much more direct Christian allegory. Neville fulfills that role of a savior figure. In the original ending, Neville has to come face to face with this idea that the infected might be more than just monsters. When they come and invade his home, they're not there to get him, they're there to rescue the woman that he's taken from them. We see from the wall of pictures of his past test subjects, he has taken many of them without mercy. Neville has continually been presented with both scientific evidence and spiritual signs they are capable of thought, of emotion, and intelligence. No matter how strange or unsettling it may seem to him, he does not need to be a savior. That is not his role here. But his pride won't let him abandon that idea. He simply refuses to stop hating and fearing the infected. He keeps trying to change them. For reasons that are completely unknown to us and to Neville, this is the way things are meant to be. Alpha rushes in and starts cracking the glass. It still makes a butterfly shape, but Neville doesn't see it. He's too busy screaming, "Let me save you." Finally, Alpha, Neville's sworn enemy, makes a smear on the glass in the shape of a butterfly. He then looks at the infected woman and she has a butterfly tattoo. Is it coincidence that Alpha uses the butterfly symbol to refer to the woman, and that butterflies have a unique meaning for Neville because of his daughter? Or is it a sign? He then walks right out amongst his enemies to return the woman, and guess what happens? They forgive him. Alpha directly acknowledges the wall of pictures, all the infected that Neville has taken, and then still extends a peace offering. We don't have to like each other, but we can coexist. This ending is still spiritually oriented, but is such a more fascinating examination of the concept of faith. The theatrical ending basically just reinforces the idea of self-sacrifice in a pretty blatant imitation of Christian theology. But it's not really applicable to most Christians, let alone people of other beliefs, because even for stout believers, how often is God asking people to make that kind of sacrifice? And is it that much of a sacrifice for Neville? A few scenes ago, he was doing the demolition derby thing with absolutely no goal of survival. He had already given up. Everything that he cherished in life, his family, his dog, it's all already gone. But with the original ending, Neville and the audience are faced with a much more difficult philosophical question. What if we had to look at people that we see as monsters and fight our every instinct to see them as people? And for people who believe in God, what if that's exactly what God was asking you to do, regardless of whether or not you understood why? But what do you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts because this is one of the most fascinating alternate ending scenarios I've ever seen. Also, a quick shout out to my college writing professor who brought all of this to my attention. He was a little obsessed with it, and now I am too. Before we wrap up, I'd like to give a sneak peek at next week's movie, WALL-E, which will be a fun blend of last month's theme of AI and this month's theme of post-apocalyptic. It's kind of the bridge, and I thought about putting it first in the lineup because of that, but then realized we all might need a palate cleanser in the middle here. There's a lot of people out there that still struggle to view animation as something more than kids' entertainment, and as you'll find over the course of this movie club, I think they could not be more wrong. As Exhibit A, I present WALL-E, which actually might be the most adult-oriented Pixar movie. It's still completely accessible for kids, but think about it. It takes place on an Earth that fell victim to issues of environmentalism, consumerism, overconsumption, and human complacency. The fears and concerns that the movie poses about humanity's future are things a kid won't have the experience to be afraid of yet, but at the same time is incredibly relevant to them. Because if the adults around them don't take note and try to put a stop to some of these things, those kids may have to pay the consequences. So here's some questions to keep in mind while you watch. The movie raises a number of societal concerns. Some of these are surface level and some of them are a bit more subtle. Was there any element that surprised you? Why? Which of the fears about our future shown in the movie resonates with you the most, and why? Considering last month's theme and this month's theme together, what do you think of WALL-E's depiction of AI as it relates to a post-apocalyptic society? As always, I'll look forward to talking with you about I Am Legend in the comments, and I'll see you back here next week for WALL-E. And if you want to be kept up to date about Movie Club, you know where to go.